I was talking to my 8-year-old son recently about the Holocaust. It was one of those moments where I was amazed at how in a sliver of time a child can go from being an infant to a critically thinking person capable of intellectual conversation and real empathy. The question came up: how many people did Hitler personally, physically kill? Hitler is responsible, of course, for all of the approximately 11 million murders of Jewish people during the Holocaust. Having just said that number, 11 million, let's pause and acknowledge what history professor Timothy Snyder said perfectly. Discussion of numbers can blunt our sense of the horrific personal character of each killing and the irreducible tragedy of each death. As anyone who has lost a loved one knows, the difference between 0 and 1 is infinity. So of the 11 million immeasurably tragic deaths, how many were literally at the hands of Adolf Hitler? The answer is 0. When my son and I learned this, his immediate response was, "So he's a coward." Historians have looked closely into this question of whether Hitler ever personally killed anyone. He fought in World War I, but officially he had 0 documented kills. There's also the disturbing story of his half-niece, Angela Raubal, who allegedly committed suicide in his apartment with his pistol. And then there were several violent events that he was involved in. So there remains suspicion and speculation, but officially, no one literally died at the hands of Adolf Hitler. Not to be ridiculous, he is responsible for all the deaths in the Holocaust, as we acknowledged. Yet he isn't the only one responsible, is he? Every Nazi leader, up and down the ranks, was also responsible. Each member in those mobile killing squads who worked alongside the German army was also responsible. The life of every SS member who killed or abused is stained by the blood of the innocent. 22 of the so-called major war criminals were tried in the beginning of the Nuremberg trials. 19 were convicted and sentenced to either death or prison. These were the high-ranking Nazi leaders who were typically far removed from the physical act of killing, but from whom came all the orders that the obedient soldiers would carry out. A comprehensive analysis of the psychology behind how all this happened, how each Nazi became willing to kill innocent Jewish people, and how all the leaders along the chain of command fell into line, is beyond the scope of this video. But we can point out one dynamic that was certainly part of it: the diffusion of responsibility, which is a diminished sense of personal accountability for action or inaction. This dynamic is part of other psychosocial phenomena as well, such as the bystander effect, and it is an essential part of the atrocities carried out by obedient groups of individuals. When a Nazi pointed his gun and pulled the trigger, he knew he was killing someone, but he didn't necessarily feel that he was acting of his own accord. He knew he was part of a regime, so he didn't feel totally morally accountable. He might even still be able to answer to his God, because although he did it, his authority figure told him to do it. He was just obeying orders. Granted, the propaganda was so thorough and effective that surely some soldiers were so delusional, so completely under the spell of this Nazi propaganda, that they may have proudly claimed full responsibility for what felt to them like a heroic act of killing the enemy. There's actually a brilliant illustration of this dynamic of the spellbound, brainwashed soldier in a Black Mirror episode that you should check out. Season 3, episode 5. So now, even the most effective propaganda programs cannot delude every soldier into thinking that killing a child was heroic. They had to justify these heinous acts to themselves, and one way they did so was by shifting moral responsibility to their commander. And the commander, well, he didn't pull the trigger, so perhaps he can answer to his God too. And plus, he had an authority figure of his own, whose orders he was following. and that authority figure had an authority figure, all the way up to Hitler. Each higher-ranking officer becomes more removed from the physical act of killing, and yet in another way, each higher-ranking officer is more culpable because he had the power to stop it from happening. Hitler killed 0 people, but Hitler killed 11 million people in the most cowardly manner. This dynamic of obedience to authority fueled by the diffusion of responsibility was evident, of course, in one of the most famous sets of psychology experiments ever, the obedience studies carried out by Stanley Milgram.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Answer, horse.
Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock, 180 volts.
Which demonstrated that a shockingly high number of normal people will inflict tremendous pain and potentially kill innocent others if an authority figure insisted they do so.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man there. I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Versions of this experiment continue to be replicated, and results are consistent.
He's in a lot of pain.
Continue, please.
But he's not comfortable.
We must continue to the end of the experiment.
Forest. That's wrong, 240 volts.
Typically, 2/3 of people will administer a potentially lethal electric shock to an innocent person if an authority figure tells them to do so. Why? Various reasons, but one of which is the diffusion of responsibility. When one person says, yes, I pulled the trigger, but I was just following orders, and another says, yes, I gave the orders, but I didn't pull the trigger, the sense of moral responsibility is spread so thinly, often across an entire chain of command, that no single individual feels fully accountable. When you think of the long and gloomy history of humankind, wrote novelist C.P. Snow, you will find far more hideous crimes have been committed in the name of obedience than have been committed in the name of rebellion. The power of cowards in power rests solely on whether their subordinates obey their commands. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo wrote that a good way to avoid crimes of obedience is to assert one's personal authority and always take full responsibility for one's actions.
I can't do this, honestly. Can we stop this experiment? Because I can't do this.
If you don't continue, we'll have to discontinue the experiment.
Yeah, okay, fine. That's fine. I'm not going to do this.
If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe.